Strolling into the Egyptian craftsmanship displays of the Brooklyn Historical Center is a chance to see articles and relics that are 1,000s of years old. Among them are old figures with an indisputable style. But if you look closer, you might notice something odd about these statues. Many of them have lost their noses over time. The sinister reason why so many Egyptian statues no longer have noses was discovered by experts. Yet before we begin, hit that subscribe button and become a piece of our local area of similar people who love history facts. Let's get started. It might appear to be a minor detail, yet the absence of noses is as a matter of fact an ordinary component across Egyptian sculptures. They had been separated at some point in their lengthy histories, despite the fact that they were not designed to be known less. In March 2019, Brooklyn Museum curator Edward Blaber told CNN that the most common question he gets is about what happened to the noses. You might think that the damage is just normal wear and tear after so many years. After all, these statues have made it through wars, bad weather, and long journeys to various museums around the world. Harped on, notwithstanding, has done investigate that recommends the purposes behind the denosing are substantially more perplexing. The examination may in all likelihood never have been finished, provided that this is true. Many individuals hadn't needed to be familiar with the noses. As specialists, for example, Blaber have concentrated on the craft of the time span. Additionally, they have been instructed to imagine the initial appearance of statues. It might appear to be unusual. However, they had arrived where he didn't even notification such a conspicuous exclusion. It's conceivable that a portion of the sculptures were harmed unintentionally. Obviously, this applies particularly to those with especially huge noses that stood out from the face and were accordingly effortlessly hit. A specialist is expected to differentiate between these are the sculptures that were purposely deformed for various different reasons. Additionally, this fails to explain why some flat Egyptian paintings have noses removed as well. Old Egypt was one of humanity's first incredible civic establishments, and a large number of its landmarks are as yet standing. From agriculture to medicine, Egyptian society was responsible for significant innovations. Among its most notorious images are incredible development tasks, for example, the pyramids and the incomparable Sphinx of Giza, which is one of the most popular nose-less sculptures of all. As a matter of fact, the Sphinx shows up in Greek and Asian legend, as well as that of Old Egypt. It was said to have a human head but a lion torso, according to legend. For the Egyptians, it was an image of security that frequently wore a hood very much like a pharaoh would. There's even a 2-mile street between sanctuaries in Karnak and Luxor that is known as Sphinx Partner, since it has so many Sphinx sculptures. To be sure, there are a few Egyptian sphinxes that have become especially popular. One is made of alabaster and was discovered in Memphis, an Egyptian city with a remastered temple. Another has been moved to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and is made of granite. It's surprising on the grounds that it wears the essence of his Boetsit, who was a female Egyptian ruler. The most well-known Sphinx of all, however, is likely the monster sculpture viewed as close to the similarly notable incredible Pyramid of Giza. This Sphinx is an amazing 66 feet in level, 240 feet long, which makes it perhaps of the biggest sculpture on the planet. Not terrible for something fabricated over 4 centuries prior. However, we still don't know much about how and why the Sphinx of Giza came to be. We are sure, however, that Pharaoh Khufu was answerable for the development of the incomparable pyramid, and its idea his child Pharaoh Khafre was behind the structure of the Sphinx. Khafre had his own pyramid, however his dad's is 10 feet taller. Khafre seems to have compensated for the more modest pyramid by surrounding his own landmark with a progression of sculptures, one of which is the Sphinx. It's a limestone form that bears Khafre's own face with hints of red that proposed might have been hued at a certain point. A few specialists think the complex of pyramids and sculptures was intended to urge the divine beings to restore Khafre after he passed on. You might be asking why we accept the Sphinx as Khafre's. Well, there is a lot of evidence to support this. Some of it comes from a dive in the 1900 years, in which a classicist from France named Auguste Mariette investigated the valley sanctuary close to the Sphinx. The one more unavoidable issue about the Sphinx name the Egyptians would have given to the sculpture. The word Sphinx actually comes from Greek and wasn't used until a few thousand years later. One hypothesis, as it was called Hurt Pale, and that implies repulsiveness, is not too far off in light of the fact that Horus was the god normally related to Khafre. However, it is known that the Sphinx's significance diminished over time. There's a tale about an Egyptian ruler named Thutmose, who needs rested off by the sculpture while it was canvassed in sand. Karnak had asked him to restore the Sphinx in a dream in exchange for his assistance in becoming the country's next ruler. believed that Ems went on to become Pharaoh, and during his reign, a cult centered on the Sphinx rose to prominence. Thus, more Sphinx symbolism spread through the country as compositions and reliefs. Notwithstanding more sculptures, the model likewise came to be viewed as a portrayal of the sun's strength during this period. This period wouldn't endure forever, notwithstanding, and love of the Sphinx would again stop. Its limestone would thus be consumed, and portions of its facial hair and hat would be broken. Yet again it was lowered in sand, and wouldn't be uncovered until the start of the 19th 100 years. Just the head was apparent when the dig started. In point of fact, it became abundantly clear that the Sphinx had no nose at all. The main endeavor to unbury the Sphinx wasn't fruitful, however, regardless of the difficult work of 160 individuals laboring under Chief Giovanni Battista of Genoa. Further endeavors were made all through the 1800s and 1900s until Selim Hassan of Egypt at last finished the responsibility during the 1930s. There have been numerous theories about what happened to the Sphinx's nose over the years, despite the fact that the elements have further eroded the statue since then. Certain individuals thought it was lost during the Napoleonic intrusion because of a gun impact, yet there are photos of a nose-less sculpture some time before Napoleon showed up in Egypt. That implies it was obliterated in a previous time, like in the 15th 100 years. Islam has been a predominant power in Egypt since the Bedouin success of the 700 years, and the religion is against worshipful admiration, and that implies the creation and love of works of art are sculptures of consecrated figures. That is an inspiration to obliterate strict sculptures then, at that point, and such items played a significant otherworldly part for the old Egyptians. In addition, religion may likewise make sense of why a few sculptures were despoiled even before the ascent of Islam. In ancient Egypt, the head of a temple was typically a statue of an ancestor who had passed away. The family would offer it food for the afterlife, flowers to symbolize rebirth, and incense to create a sacred scent. Solicitations would likewise be made to the dead for help, some of which we can find out about from contemporary letters that have made due through the ages. The ancient Egyptians created sculptures of men and gods that served a spiritual purpose. It meant that the gods could live inside the statue, and that an effigy of a deceased person could be used to keep their soul. Craftsmanships would be put in burial places too to assist the dead with getting contributions from the residing. Egyptian art is distinguished from later Greek and Roman art by its distinctive style. However, due to the formal and sterile images and the degree of abstraction, it does not quite appear natural. Obviously, the workmanship made to rest and burial chambers wasn't really intended to be seen by the more extensive world. Instead, they were made so that they could be used by the gods or the dead. Sculptures in Old Egypt would in general look ahead so they could see the rituals acted in their honor. In order to participate in processions, some divine cult statues even underwent daily performances in which they were dressed and perfumed. These statues frequently served as the points of connection between our world and the supernatural realm where the gods lived. Lords expected to accommodate gods so they would safeguard Egypt. One model is in how pictures of the pharaoh would be portrayed making contributions to pictures of the divinities. Since each part of the statues served the same purpose as it would on a living person, their destruction was more than just petty vandalism. It was also a way to disrupt the perception of people's relationship with gods and prevent deities from taking up residence in an image. Statues were so important that their destruction was more than just petty vandalism. So a divine being sculpture without ears would not be able to pay attention to petitions. On account of noses, this implies their expulsion takes on an evil edge. Rao, for example, figured Miss III maintained that future rulers should slip from him, as opposed to his stepmother had Shepsed in the interim. Pharaoh Kensington's strict changes were totally repealed by his relatives. A canon obliterated pictures of the god Amon so he could pronounce the sun god go to be the primary god of the Egyptians. His child to tank him and re-established a man to conspicuousness, notwithstanding, and pictures of a Kennington, his significant other, and his god were undeniably killed, all things being equal. The Egyptians went to great lengths to safeguard the images that were significant to them as a result of all of this. For instance, walls on 3 sides surrounded numerous statues to protect them from attack. Now and then a wall would try and be set in front too. 2 or 3 eye openings would be everything that was left when the ministers came to make a contribution. So the obliteration of parts of sculptures by the Egyptians was simply a demonstration of wanton defacement. It required careful planning and precision with the chisel, which must have been directed by skilled hands. At times, engravings were likewise harmed, which implied the guilty parties must have the option to peruse to know which etchings to mutilate. That makes sense of why a few sculptures were distorted, yet others met their destinies a lot later. only one out of every odd human advancement to follow. The old Egyptians had similar worship for sculptures. Christians regarded them as need might have arisen to be obliterated. For example, while Muslims didn't think the things had any power whatsoever, you might be asking why the Christians didn't obliterate the sculptures totally, instead of simply eliminating parts. In fact, leaving the deformed sculptures on display was a way for the Egyptians to show how powerless the gods had become. It was a victorious assertion of triumph. In the 7th century, an Islamic army conquered Egypt, and Muslims used the ancient statues as building materials. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a thing.